Okay, in the last tutorial we looked at how we could create a color cast to match a corporate color palette very simply by using the hue saturation adjustment. This simulates the corporate color. It doesn't actually reproduce the image in that exact Pantone. As you saw, we had to go in and pick the Pantone color and then convert it to RGB or convert it to HSB and then dial that into the hue saturation dialog box. So it doesn't actually still output the image in RGB or in CMYK. So if you're actually trying to save some money, if you're trying to print the job using that specific Pantone color, and you're going to go for that black and a Pantone color kind of thing to save money or to get that particular high quality impression, then this isn't going to work out for you because it's still going to be a CMYK image. So we're going to look at a technique in Photoshop that actually allows us to use those specific inks and output specific printing plates when we bring the job into InDesign or into Illustrator to continue the journey. So I'm just going to start over again. We have to be starting with a grayscale image. So first I'm just going to get rid of my hue saturation layer. Delete key on the keyboard is the easiest way of doing that. Boom. Okay, so now we're stuck with our RGB image again. The first thing we need to do then is convert it to grayscale. So easiest way to convert an image to grayscale is go to image, mode, and grayscale. That just sort of strips out all the color information. You can, I'm just going to undo here. You can do something in advance if you go to edit, image adjustments, and then you choose black and white. That allows you to create a black and white or grayscale image by sort of playing around with the different plates. And depending on the image itself and the color cast that might be in the image, you can pull out different amounts of information that's contained in the different channels to give yourself maybe more sharpness or a different feel, change the ambient levels in the image. So I'm just going to play around a little bit, and so basically what you want to do is just drag your sliders left and right, see if they have any impact. If there's no difference, like you can see, there's really very little cyan in this image, and so that's not going to make much difference. I can leave that at 50%, or I can even leave it at 0. We can just do the same here. Greens, that's not really having much effect. Blues, not having a lot of effect. Magentas is going to have a little bit of effect. So I can see that with the magentas, if you just take a look down the creases of the shirt, it's bringing out a bit more detail there. I kind of like that, just a little bit more crispness to the image. So I'm going to take the magenta all the way down, so that's nice. Reds is going to have a very strong impact. You can see that. A lot of the image is red, so I'm going to try to be just sort of judicious with the red. And then see what impact the yellow has. So yellow is going to bring in a lot of grain. If you want to have that grainy feel, then actually you can jack up the yellow, and that actually doesn't look too bad. Take it down and it starts to get a little bit negative. So up to you how you want to have that image. That just happens to be the way this particular image turned out, and it's not always going to be the case that yellow is going to have that effect, and green is having no effect at all. And then what you can do, so that's basically what we're going to set up here, and then we can just say OK, and maybe I want to just darken it a little bit. Okay, there we go. Okay, so still an RGB image at this point. We've used the black and white effect. There's also a black and white adjustment here in the adjustments palette, but we've just used it, applied it directly to the image as a one-shot effect. We use that so that we have a bit better control over how Photoshop is going to convert this image to grayscale. So now the color information is kind of gone, even though it still is an RGB document. So I just can now go image, mode, grayscale. Photoshop may warn me about losing some color information, but now you can see that up here at the top of the screen it says gray. So as soon as you've converted the image to grayscale, that unlocks an additional mode called Duotone, and that's where all the fun's going to happen. So in the Duotone, we have the option of, here's a monotone. We're going to just choose Duotone from the pull-down menu here so that we can keep our black plate to get nice rich shadows, but then we can bring in a second ink. And I'm going to do that right now by just clicking on this swatch here. It brings up our standard color picker. We're going to click on color libraries, and once again we're going to grab our Pantone color, which we said was Pantone 307. So now what we're doing is we're adding 307 to the grayscale image in the exact same, at the moment in the exact same proportions as we have in the black. And that's why this image has suddenly gotten really dark, because we've got black ink and blue ink that's sort of filling in the shadows. So what we're going to want to do now is we're going to want to play around with the transfer curves. That's this line here. And actually, if you're familiar with curves adjustment in the adjustments palette, then this is going to look very familiar. So I'm just going to go into the black for now and show you, because that's where we're going to see the majority of the change. And I click on black right now, just get this out of the way. We see a curve, and if I just grab one end of that curve and drag it around, you're going to see that the image immediately lightens up. Why does it lighten up? Well, what I've said is at 0% ink coverage, I want 0% black. Okay, that makes sense. So that when 0% ink coverage means the paper is going to completely show through. So in other words, that's the brightest parts of my image, where there's no ink. Okay, on the other side, we've got 100% ink coverage. I've dropped my black down to 30%. So what I'm saying here is that where I'm supposed to get 100% black shadows, I really only want to get a maximum of 30% black ink. So it's going to be gray. In fact, it's going to be light gray. And that's why the image is lightened up a lot. It hasn't completely lightened up because don't forget, there's still my blue plate, and I am getting 100% blue ink still in those areas. Now, I'm not saying this is the right curve to use. I'm just sort of illustrating the most distinct way possible how this curve works. So we're going to take that right back, because really we want to have 100% black in the darkest shadows. But maybe we don't need so much black in the midtones. So I'm just going to put a point and grab this thing and sort of drag it around, drag it down, and you can see now this has the effect of sort of desaturating the image a little bit and lightening up those midtones again. So now we're seeing some blue in the midtones still, but we're seeing a lot less black. So the black really only starts to kick in after about 50%. I like to make this a nice round number, so I'm just going to manually type in, let's say, 25% right in there. We can now play around with the blue transfer curve as well. Maybe we don't need to have that much blue in the shadows. It's not going to help anyway at the darkest levels to have any blue, and it's just going to add extra ink on the paper. And if you have ever taken an eyedropper and dropped water or ink on a piece of paper, you know that it bleeds, and the more water you put or the more ink you put, the more soft that supple that paper becomes, and the more distortion there is. So we want to actually try to minimize the amount of ink we put on a piece of paper. So if we're adding 100% black and 100% of our Pantone color, that's making for more ink coverage on that in that particular area of the page, and that just causes bleed, dot gain, and eventually could potentially even cause warpage in the paper, although at 200% coverage it's probably not going to do that. Okay, so we've brought our darkest levels down, but what we can do now is we can bring the midtones up, sort of bring in some of that blue color. Now we've got a nice, pleasant sort of blue cast. I'm just going to round that up to 40%. Essentially what's happening is I'm keeping the curve pretty much changed from 0 to 40%. We're getting a standard transfer, and then that just sort of levels off after 40%. So we're bringing it down about 30% in the shadows. And that's going to create a very pleasant color cast to the image. Nice ink coverage. And what's really cool about this now is that Pantone ink is actually going to get saved with the file, so that the file is now going to have that Pantone ink embedded, provided that we save in the correct file format. So now we're going to go to File, Save As, and we must save this thing as a Photoshop EPS file in order the best way for us to preserve that Pantone. So we're going to save that as a Photoshop EPS file. You may want to add the colors in here. Or you don't even need the word Pantone, really. Save that. And then in the options that are going to ensue, we want to make sure we include the transfer function. This is really important. If we don't include that, then the transfer function that we tweaked in the last stage is going to get ignored, and we're just going to get the standard diagonal line that you would normally get. So make sure you include the transfer function when you save that file. The preview doesn't really matter. This is going to be an ugly bitmap black and white preview, so we might as well go with 8 bits per pixel. That will increase the file size a little bit, but at least we'll get a color preview when you bring it into InDesign and you have performance mode set to low. So, and otherwise then we should be good to go. So hit OK. And now when we bring this file into InDesign, I'm not going to open up InDesign to show you, but if you bring this file into InDesign, it will actually create a new color swatch when you import the file with that exact Pantone color in there. So it's a good idea to do that first before you start choosing font colors and whatnot, because you don't want to have two different Pantone colors that are supposed to be the same plate but actually going to get output to two different plates. So bring in the image first. That will create the color, the Pantone color in your swatches, and then you can pick that Pantone color when you're colorizing your type or putting in graphic elements and so forth.